Hello, everyone. We all know the story: a man named Columbus, a few small ships, and a belief that the world was round. He sailed west to find the east and stumbled upon a new world. It's the heroic opening chapter to the modern age, a tale of courage and vision. But what if the story we know is a lie? Not a lie in the facts, but a lie in the telling. What if Columbus didn't open a door to a golden age, but the official narrative is one of glory, of flags planted on new shores, of civilization brought to the unenlightened? But beneath this polished veneer lies another history, a shadow history written in blood, madness, and whispers of the damned. It speaks of ships that sailed off the map and returned as phantoms, of men who sought cities of gold and found only their own personal hells, of treasures that carried the... This is the story of the age of discovery's dark side, a story of what happens when the hunger for glory becomes a lust for gold, and that lust curdles into something far, far worse. It's a story that asks a terrifying question: did we discover the world, or did we break it? The year is 1775. The whaling ship Herald is navigating the treacherous, ice-choked waters of the Arctic Circle. Adrift, it's a three-masted schooner, sails tattered, hull scarred by ice. There are no signs of life. It's a ghost on the water. The captain of the Herald, wary but intrigued, orders a boarding party. As they draw closer, an unnatural silence hangs over the vessel. The ice groans around them, the only sound in a frozen world. They call out, no answer. The ship is the Octavius, or what's left of her. The scene that greets them is one of perfect preserved horror. A sailor is frozen mid-stride on the stairs to the quarterdeck, his face a mask of shock below deck. The entire crew is found in their bunks, wrapped in thick blankets, frozen solid in their final sleep. They look like statues carved from ice, their last moments captured for eternity. The air is so cold it feels like glass shards in the lungs. In the captain's cabin, the boarding party finds the most chilling sight of all. The ship's captain is seated at his desk, pen in hand, his gaze fixed on the logbook before him. He, too, is a statue of ice. A woman, likely his wife, is frozen on the bunk, clutching their young son, both wrapped in furs. On the desk, a small brazier holds charcoal that had long since burned out. The logbook is open. The last entry is dated the 11th of November, 1762. 13 years ago, the ink is faded but legible. The final spidery words read, "We have now been enclosed in the ice for 17 days. Our approximate location is 160 leagues north of Barrows. I shall not leave this cabin again." But here is where the story shifts from tragedy to utter impossibility. The Herald found the Octavius off the coast of Greenland, in the Atlantic Ocean. But the captain's last entry places him north of Alaska, in the Pacific. To get from where they were trapped to where they were found, the Octavius, with its crew of frozen corpses, would have had to navigate the one thing that had been the graveyard of countless living explorers, the Northwest Passage. For centuries, the greatest mariners on Earth tried and failed to conquer that labyrinth of ice. Entire expeditions vanished without a trace, crushed and consumed by the Arctic. Yet, this silent, unmanned vessel, a floating tomb sailing under the command of a dead man, had seemingly done the impossible. It had become its own ghost, piloted by currents and winds through the most dangerous waterway on the planet. Imagine the Herald's crew standing in that frozen cabin, reading those words, "The world outside is silent, but their minds are screaming." How? Did the currents alone guide this ship on a perfect 13-year journey through a maze that had claimed the living, or was some other force at play? Was the ship cursed to sail on, an eternal monument to its crew's desperate ambition? The legend of the Octavius is a chilling overture to the age of exploration. It's a story that reminds us that the oceans and the new lands held mysteries far deeper. The ice of the Arctic preserved a perfect tableau of death, but the jungles of the New World, they didn't preserve anything. They swallowed men whole. They swallowed their sanity, their morality, and their souls. And it all started with a whisper, a word that drove men to abandon everything for a fever dream El Dorado, the Golden City. It was a legend that spread like a plague among the Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century. A king so rich He covered himself in gold dust and bathed in a sacred lake to the Spanish, who had already plundered the riches of the Aztecs and Incas. This was not a myth. It was a certainty, a final, ultimate prize, and no one was more consumed by this fever than a man named Lope de Aguirre. History remembers Aguirre as El Loco, the madman. But he didn't start that. He was a veteran conquistador, hardened by decades of brutal campaigns in Peru. He was overlooked, underpaid, and simmering with a violent resentment for the Spanish crown, which he felt had cheated him of his rightful glory and wealth. In 1560, he joined a massive expedition led by a nobleman named Pedro de Uz, Fea, their goal to sail down the Amazon River and find El Dorado. From the very beginning, the expedition was a descent into chaos. The jungle was a living entity, a green hell that fought them at every turn. Disease, starvation, and attacks by indigenous tribes thinned their ranks daily. The air was thick with humidity and paranoia. Men began to whisper. They looked at their commander, Urs Faya, a man of noble birth, and saw weakness. He was a master of manipulation, his words like venom, turning desperate men against their leader. He saw the expedition not as a path to gold for Spain, but as a path to power for himself. One night, it happened Aguirre and his conspirators crept into Urs Faya's hammock and brutally murdered him. With Urs Faya dead, Aguirre seized control. But he didn't just want to lead an expedition. He forced the remaining men to sign a declaration renouncing their allegiance to King Philip II of Spain. He declared himself the wrath of God, Prince of Freedom, King of Tierra Firme. It was an act of pure, breathtaking treason. His descent into madness was swift and total. He saw betrayal in every shadow, conspiracy in every whisper. He began a reign of terror, executing anyone he suspected of disloyalty. He murdered the nobleman he had installed as a puppet leader. He had Urs Faya's beautiful mistress, Infez de Anja, a woman who had survived the initial coup, stabbed to death, fearing her influence. The river journey became a floating nightmare. The men weren't searching for gold anymore. They were just trying to survive Aguirre. He delivered rambling, blasphemous speeches from the deck of his boat, declaring war on Spain, on the Church, on God himself. His monologues, recorded by the expedition's terrified chronicler, are chilling relics of a mind completely unhinged. "I am the wrath of God," he would scream at the oppressive, silent jungle. "Who else could lead you through this hell? The King of Spain. He sits on his throne and grows fat while we bleed for his empire. I am your king now, and this river shall be our kingdom." They drifted past villages, not as explorers, but as a plague. They slaughtered, pillaged, and burned, leaving a trail of devastation in their wake. The quest for a mythical golden city had devolved into a real, tangible rampage of blood and fire. Aguirre's madness had an unnerving logic to it. He believed he was a rebel, a righteous avenger against a corrupt system. In a letter he later sent to King Philip II, a document that somehow survived, he calls the king ungrateful and lists his grievances with the raw fury of a man who feels utterly betrayed. It's one of the most remarkable documents of the era, a direct, profanity-laced message from a madman to the most powerful monarch in the world. He writes, "I am certain that few kings go to heaven. You are a king, and so I believe you will not go to heaven, for you are worse than Lucifer." Eventually they reached the Atlantic Ocean and sailed north, a ragged band of pirates and murderers led by a self-proclaimed. Their plan was to invade Panama and then Peru to carve out their own empire. But his tyranny could not last. His men, exhausted and terrified, finally saw a chance to escape when they landed in Venezuela. They deserted him. Aguirre, cornered and abandoned in a small village, realized his dream was over, and in his final act of horrific madness, he turned to his own daughter, Elvira. He knew what fate awaited her at the hands of the Spanish loyalists. He looked at her and said, "I am to die, and I must kill you, so that you do not have to live in shame, a traitor's daughter." And he stabbed her to death. Moments later, Spanish soldiers burst in. Aguirre met them, not with a plea, but with a boast. He was shot and killed. His body was dismembered, and his head was placed in an iron cage. Lope de Aguirre never found El Dorado. No one ever did. The city of gold was a phantom, a mirage born of greed, but the story of El Loco shows us the true nature of this curse. It wasn't a supernatural force. It was the poison of human ambition. The jungle didn't drive Aguirre mad. It simply stripped away the thin veneer of civilization and revealed them. The age of exploration is filled with men like Aguirre, men whose names we don't celebrate because their stories reveal an uncomfortable truth. The line between a hero and a monster is often just a matter of who writes the history. But sometimes the curse was more than just a madness of the mind. Sometimes it felt like the land itself, or the treasures stolen from it, were fighting back. To understand this, we must go to the heart of the Aztec Empire, the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, a marvel of engineering floating on a lake, and we must witness the night that stained its waters red. The year is 1520. Herne, Fedencourt Fes and his small army of conquistadors are trapped. They had entered Tenochtitlan as guests of the Emperor Moctezuma, but their greed quickly turned them into captors. Moctezuma is dead, and the Aztecs are united in their desire to destroy the Spanish invaders. Cortes knows they have to escape, but they can't leave behind the reason they came, the treasure. For months, they have been looting the imperial treasury, amassing a fortune in gold, silver, and precious stones beyond their wildest dreams. It was a king's ransom on the night of the 30th of June. The night was dark and stormy, the rain muffling their footsteps as they tried to sneak out of the city across one of the narrow causeways that connected it to the mainland. But this escape was weighed down by avarice. Cortes had ordered the king's fifth, the 20% of all treasure reserved for the Spanish crown, to be loaded onto horses. He then told his men, "Take what you will, but be warned, he who is like..." It was a warning most of them ignored. The soldiers, many of them poor men who had risked everything, went mad with greed. They stuffed their pockets, their armor, their shirts with gold bars, with priceless Aztec jewelry, with heavy idols. They were no longer soldiers, they were walking treasure chests. Their avarice would be their doom. A woman fetching water heard them. She screamed in alarm. Suddenly, the night exploded. The canal swarmed with Aztec war canoes. Thousands of warriors descended on the causeway, a suffocating wave of obsidian, bladed swords and fury. The retreat turned into a slaughter. The Spanish, weighed down by their stolen gold, could barely fight. They stumbled. They fell from the causeway into the dark, murky water, and the gold, the very thing they lusted for, became an anchor, dragging them. A soldier who survived, Bernal de Fez del Castillo, later wrote of the horror. He described the screams of his comrades as they were pulled from the water and dragged into canoes, destined for the sacrificial altar of the Aztec war god. He saw men sink beneath the waves, their hands still clutching the gold that was killing them. The lake became a graveyard of greedy men. By the time the sun rose, a shattered remnant of Cortes's army had reached the mainland. Over half his Spanish soldiers were dead. Thousands of their native allies had been slaughtered, and almost all of the treasure was gone, resting at the bottom of Lake Texcoco with the bodies of its thieves. The Spanish call this night La Noche Triste, the night of sorrows. But for the Aztecs, it was a victory. And for the gold, but the story doesn't end there. A curse seemed to cling to the little treasure that was saved, and to the men who survived. Cortes would eventually return to conquer Tenochtitlan, but the glory was forever tainted. Many of the survivors of La Noche Triste lived out their lives in poverty and obscurity, haunted by the ghosts of that night. They complained that Cortes had cheated them of their share of the subsequent loot, that their sacrifice had been for nothing. The gold itself seemed to carry the rage of a fallen civilization. Legends grew. It was said that the treasure at the bottom of the lake was protected by the spirits of the drowned, that anyone who tried to retrieve it would meet a terrible end. Even centuries later, attempts to dredge the lake for the lost treasure have yielded little, as if the city, now Mexico City, refuses to give up its blood-soaked secrets. The curse of Moctezuma's treasure is a powerful parable. The conquistadors saw gold and saw only its material value. They did not see its spiritual significance to the Aztec people, the blood and history. In taking it, they didn't just commit theft, they committed sacrilege. And the treasure, in its own way, exacted its revenge, turning their greatest desire into the instrument of their death. The land itself was an unwilling participant in this great discovery, and it had its own ways of pushing back, of erasing the intruders. There is perhaps no greater testament to this than the chilling mystery of the lost colony. The English, late to the game, were desperate to establish their own foothold. Sir Walter Raleigh sponsored an ambitious attempt, a permanent colony on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. More than 115 men, women, and children, led by Governor John White, made the perilous journey. They were looking for a new life, a new beginning. They found something else entirely. There was mistrust and sporadic violence. Supplies ran low, realizing the colony would not survive the winter without help. John White made the agonizing decision to sail back to England for reinforcements, leaving behind his wife, his daughter Eleanor, and his newborn granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. He promised he would return within a few months. It was a promise. When he arrived in England, he found a nation in crisis. The Spanish Armada was preparing to invade. Every available ship was commandeered for the war effort. White was trapped, frantically trying to find a ship to take him back to his family, while his colony was left to fend for itself on the edge of a vast unknown continent. 3 years, it took 3 long years for him to finally return. Imagine his state of mind, 3 years of anxiety, of nightmares, of praying that his family and his people had survived. As they landed, an eerie silence greeted them. The settlement was gone. Not destroyed, not burned to the ground. It had been dismantled. The houses were taken down, the fortifications carefully removed. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle. It was as if the entire colony had been neatly packed. The only clue they found was a single word carved into a wooden post of the former fort, a word that has echoed through history as the epitome of an unsolved mystery. Croatoan. White's heart must have leaped. The Croatoan were a friendly tribe living on a nearby island, now known as Hatteras Island. The colonists had discussed moving there if they got into trouble. This must be it, a message. His crew, already weary from the journey, refused to risk it. The ship was damaged. Their supplies were low. They forced White to abandon the search and return to England. He never saw his family again. He died in obscurity, never knowing what happened to his daughter, his granddaughter, or the 115 souls he had left behind. So what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke, the Croatoan carving? The logical theory is that the colonists, facing starvation or conflict, abandoned their settlement and integrated with the Croatoan tribe. There is some circumstantial evidence for this. Later explorers reported seeing Native Americans with gray eyes and lighter hair in the area, people who claimed their ancestors could speak from a book. But no definitive archaeological evidence has ever been found on Hatteras Island to confirm. And if their move was planned and peaceful, why was the settlement so meticulously dismantled? Why not just leave? Other theories are far darker. Did a more hostile tribe, angered by the English presence, slaughter the colonists and carry away any evidence of their existence? Some believe the Spanish, who saw the English colony as a threat to their own claims, sent a force from Florida to wipe it out. And then there are the whispers, the local legends that grew in the dark soil of this mystery, tales of a malevolent spirit of the land angered by the intruders. Some even point to the name carved on a second tree found by White, Crow, which was interpreted as a partial carving. What if the colonists were interrupted? What if they were being taken, one by one, by something that lived in the ancient forests? The most chilling. No definitive answers. Just a void. The colonists came to a new world full of hope, and that world swallowed them, leaving behind only a single cryptic word. It's a haunting reminder that the continent was not an empty slate waiting to be written upon. It was an ancient place, with its own peoples, its own rules, and perhaps its own power. The English didn't just fail to build. And if you enjoy delving into these historical mysteries that challenge the official narrative, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us uncover more of these forgotten tales: the ghost ship Octavius, the Mad King Aguirre, the cursed gold of La Noche Triste, the vanished colony of Roanoke. These are not just isolated stories of misfortune. They are pieces of a mosaic, and when you put them together, they paint a very different picture of the age of discovery. The one we're taught in school is a story of progress, of light spreading into darkness. It's a linear, triumphant march forward, but the reality was far messier. It was chaotic, brutal, and often utterly insane. The explorers who we mythologize as demigods they were driven by a complex cocktail of courage, faith, greed, and desperation. They sailed into a world they did not understand, and in their ignorance and arrogance, they unleashed forces they could not control. They sought to conquer nature, but nature in the form of ice, jungle, storms, and disease proved to be a far more formidable foe than any army. They sought to conquer people, and in doing so, they unleashed a cycle of violence and retribution that echoes to this day. They saw new lands not as homes to millions, but as treasure chests to be pried open, and in their frantic search for gold, they often found something else entirely. They found the limits of their own sanity. They found that the human soul, when stripped of law and society, can become a Lope de Aguirre, screaming blasphemies on a raft in the middle of the Amazon, is the perfect symbol of this. He went looking for a city of gold and ended up building a kingdom of madness in his own mind. The New World acted as a mirror, reflecting the best and, more often, the absolute worst of the men who arrived on its shores. So we come back to our original question: did the Age of Discovery discover the world or destroy it? They certainly put the entire globe on the map, connecting cultures that had been separate for millennia. This connection, this globalization, is the foundation of the modern world we live in. We cannot deny that, but the price of that connection was staggering. Entire civilizations, like the Aztec and the Inca, were not just defeated. They were shattered, their cultures systematically dismantled, their knowledge. The lust for resources initiated a pattern of exploitation that continues to this day. And what of the discoverers themselves? So many of them met tragic ends, consumed by the very greed that drove them, lost at sea, killed by the people they sought to conquer, betrayed by their own men. It was an age that devoured its own children. The glory they sought was often fleeting, but the destruction they wrought was permanent. The curses they unleashed were not necessarily supernatural. The curse was the insatiable human hunger for more gold, more land, more power. A hunger that, once unleashed, is almost impossible to contain. The stories we've explored tonight are the footnotes and forgotten chapters of that age. They are uncomfortable because they challenge the simple narrative of heroes and villains. They show us that the past is a wilderness full of ghosts and unanswered questions. It reminds us that for every celebrated discovery, there is a shadow story of loss, a tale of what was broken to make way for the new. The shining legacy of the age of exploration is built upon a foundation of countless tragedies, mysteries, and bones. That's all for today's video. If you like this video, please subscribe, like it, and support us. Your engagement is our greatest